And I think the one thing that is consistent whenever I think about Kelvin is accountability and the collective, all right? And when you have those as the foundation principles of how you're building the program, and I'll be real with you too, there's an old school methodology to him that in a new school age, I am so appreciative of. As somebody that has 3 kids now, I want my kids to be challenged on a day-to-day basis. I want my kids to be spoken to like a real person. I want them to see when there's passion, when there's anger, when there's happiness. I want them to get the full experience. And Kelvin is allowed to be himself, and I think that resonates with the people that he recruits. Once again, it's not for everybody. But when I see programs that are built off that type of foundation, it makes me proud to be a player that came from the program I came from, because that's how I was coached.
How have you seen the game of college basketball change since you played?
I just came back and spent some more time with Nate Oates. I think we are trending a lot more towards data analytics. I think you're seeing a lot more threes, threes, layups, points per possession, KenPom. This is the new terminology in our game. It's fun to see, but I do respect that in college styles make fights. I hear Coach Greenberg talk about that all the time. And I think as I've gotten older, I am very appreciative of seeing different styles of play. Wisconsin, prime example, it's not the old school Wisconsin team. They're playing very differently than what they played before. But still, that's a skewed difference, right, in his opinion of it. So I think I'm way more appreciative of the fact that in college you see more, but I do think we're skewing towards a faster pace. But then once again, college can throw you off. It's different. I don't know if that answers your question. But I think, it's because we have so many different styles in college, I don't think you're going to see, the majority of teams play a certain way. I think you're going to see a lot of coaches try to imprint their own style on the game, which is important for college. It's what differentiates it from the other ranks.
What does it say about the culture that Stanton is instilled here, that you really don't see guys transfer out of the program?
I talked about the collective before. I think one of the most challenging things to do now as a guy who's been around a ton of programs, pro and college, is be able to meet the players where they are, right? And I think in a day and age where we're talking about collectives, we're talking about NIL, we're talking about players having representation that then is in touch with the program about, well, this player is averaging double the points, he needs double the salary. I think setting expectations is very important, and that comes along with communication. And I think that's where Kelvin has a chance to be different and is different, and how that's constant communication with your players, with their agents, about what the expectations are and about how they're changing. And I think the more you can have direct conversation with players and their respective teams, that leads to the best results. And the one thing I've always known about Kelvin, trust me, my wife went to school IU. I know IU misses Kelvin Sampson a ton. There was always direct conversations. They were hard, but as my wife always says, we can do hard things together. I think that epitomizes how Kelvin leads.
As a former point guard, what stands out to you about Milos and his game, and maybe compared to guys like Shed, obviously 2 different players, but what kind of stands out to you?
I mean, his assist to turnover ratio over the last 5 games has been stupid. It's insane. And, from somebody that played that position, it's one thing to adapt to a new style of play, right, and a new coach. It's another thing to have that type of margin of success. And I think for him, because of his experience, you could just tell certain players see the game at a different speed. My junior year, I saw the game at a very slow down speed. And when you have a feel for the players you're on the court with, when you have a sense of who you are, which I think is really important for Uzan, right? Like, he knows what kind of player he is. And I think having that confidence, that permeates through the rest of your team. And I think also, as a guy that played off of other guys who can score and pass the ball as well, when you have a teammate that is looking out for your best interests, that also can be an orchestrator on the floor, like a maestro, you want to play for a guy like that. Because if you run the court, you're going to get the ball. You know how many times I watch tape, or how many games I watch, why I see respect to bigs that bust their tail on the defensive end and then sprint the court and don't get rewarded because the guard is dribbling with his head down, or the guard is thinking more about me first. But when you have somebody like him that rewards players for what they do on the defensive end, you want to play for a guy like that, because it's like taking your big out to a prime meal. You're like, I'm going to feed you, I'm going to keep feeding you, and you're going to keep setting screens for you, you're going to keep rebounding you, because I'm incentivizing you to play on it.
So you guys can be anywhere in the country. What was so enticing about this game, this matchup, and maybe this setting at U of H?
I mean, well, first off, it's a top 10 matchup. And I think, there are other matchups. Auburn and Kentucky is another really big one that's occurring. Obviously, Kentucky's doing well this year. Auburn's number one in the country. I think there is, though, about showing appreciation and respecting what's been built here. Like, I'm going to say it again because I think it's really important, and I'm saying it with a very serious face. And it's not to say there's no respect towards what Kentucky is building with Mark Pope and what they came off with John Calipari. There's no disrespect to Bruce Pearl and Auburn and them being number one in the country. But I think what Kelvin has been able to do here has been remarkable. And when I watch the sustained excellence over his time period here, that needs to be appreciated. That needs to be rewarded. And I think it's an honor to come here, talking to Hakeem Olajuwon, the way he comes back. This is a really cool place to visit. And the fact that it means something new in this age, but also understanding the history here, to see the way he's reinvented that and to see the way the players have bought it. You talked about Shed, you talked about Sasser, players that are in the league. There is a high level of basketball being played here, and I'm glad we get a chance to showcase that on the Worldwide Leader.
Jay, are you surprised at how much success they've had so early in the Big 12?
I mean, I literally wrote down a number. 29-4 is ridiculous. It's I don't know if I am surprised. I think I'm more shocked. I think I am shocked. I think that's an honest assessment. And I thought it would take some time to adjust to the caliber of the Big 12, but there's so many moving parts. And I think that speaks volumes about how they recruit, I talk a lot about foundation, what that foundation is here, and how that's portable. And that can be dropped in any conference, and it will translate towards success. I think I am shocked it translated so quickly to dominance. I think success and dominance are two different things, right? You can be successful in the league and, think about what we're talking about with the SEC, right? You're talking about teams that maybe finish 7-10 in the SEC can make the tournament. Granted, the SEC is an incredible conference, but, you can have marginal year number-wise and that still be a successful year depending where you are, but this is dominance. That's a different word than success.
Hey Jay, so much gets made about guard play in the tournament. When you look at their depth, do you like where they stand in case of an injury like they've had the last couple of years, or a guy has an off shooting night? Do they have enough depth to withstand that?
Yeah, I think they do. The hard part about where we are in basketball, which as we're on the verge of expanding the tournament, which I wish that we were actually going the opposite way. Because I don't believe that everybody deserves to be in the tournament, but this is about money, and I understand the financial repercussions for that. Is that the best team doesn't always win the tournament. My junior year, prime example, I was the second pick in the draft, Mike Denley was the third pick in the draft, Carlos Boozer, perennial all-star, Chris Duhon played 10 plus years in the league, Dante Jones was in the league for 10 years, we were up 19 against Indiana, we lost that game, we got cold, all right? And we had injuries on that team, so I think, yes, this team can withstand an injury, depending upon who that injury is to, will matter, right? But there's always an element of luck that goes into winning 6 games in a row. I don't care what anybody says. And I've been on the losing end twice, and I've been on the winning end once. And I mean, Final Four, we were down 22 points to Maryland in the Final Four, right? Like, we got a chance to experience a team we played 4 times that year. So there's an element of luck it takes into winning anything, and health is one of those elements.
Seeding is so tough to sort of figure out, but when you see a team that's on the verge of winning the Big 12 or can do it the way that they're doing it, that last number 1 that many people think is still up for grab, do you put them?
Yes, firmly in the conversation. Yes, I do. I even think with the depth there is in the SEC, yes, I do. I think it has to be rewarded. I think their non-conference schedule can prove that.
Houston's still chasing that national title, but obviously they've done a lot of winning. How close are they to the modern Blue Bloods with all the winning with all the winning they've been doing? How close are they to that? If you even consider that,
A thing?
Blue Blood, thing.
I was gonna say, yeah. You know what? I think, no offense to your question, but it's a lame topic. It feels like a lame topic. And I say that because if you're a traditionalist, if you think this is a blue blood, then great. If you don't, why the hell do I care? 29-4 in 2 years. How else would you describe dominance? If you want to call me a blue blood, fine. But I think there's so much saturation in the marketplace in today's game due to NIL. And I think you're seeing that with talent, right? Like, look at Kansas and what's happening. Even though I think they have talent, there are a lot of times there are these schools that people traditionally would say, oh, I'm going to go to this school because, it's where you would go. But now with NIL, now with cultures, now with social media, you get a chance to see into other prisms, right, of how other schools are ran. So, for me, I don't really subscribe to the blue blood conversation. I know it's probably weird considering I went to school at Duke, but I think if you win at a high clip, who cares?
You were a really good shooter during your time.
Thank you. Thank you.
What do you think about the depth? And I think the shooting of this team is kind of considered a little bit different this year for this team with the depth. What are your thoughts on guys like Manu Sharp, LJ Cryer, and what you've been seeing from them shooting wise?
Yeah, that's Seth and I we've been doing college ball. He's been doing it longer than I have, but we've been attached to the hip for a while now at ESPN, and we always find ourselves in heated debates about respective teams. And I think we've both been until this year, and I don't want to speak for him, but God, up here it sounds like we're a married couple. It's so weird. Funny how that happens. But it's always about, for me in the past, it's been what about those moments where you get stuck offensively, right? And obviously, great rebounding team. They gain a lot of experience from that, and they get a lot of point accumulations off their offensive rebounding. But what happens when you, like I said before, in a tournament, to win 6 games, you have moments where you get cold. Your defense is something that always travels, but having a plethora of shooters and guys that can take on that load is the differentiation between this team and those teams before. And, I heard the question before, is this his most talented team? I believe so. Now, it doesn't mean that that's going to translate to a deeper run. Seth always gets on me for this, but people always say, well, can they win a championship? I'm like, sure. But let me see the bracket. I'll be honest with you guys, each and every year as a player in this game, okay, I think we can win, but I have to see the bracket. Who's in our bracket? Do we have an easier path? Do we have a more difficult path? That stuff matters. Seeding matters. You talked about seeding. It matters. If you're misseed. So it's all these things are things that matter. But yes, I do think their depth and I do think their shooting is a major point of differentiation between this team and years before.
This time of year, teams that have experience, that goes a long way. Roberts has been here 6 years. Can you imagine 6 years with Kelvin and the practices and it's going through boot camp every year basically. But just to have a guy like that who's your glue to sort of rise to the occasion because he's been there.
Yeah, Rick Pitino made some comments the other day about not recruiting high school kids anymore as much, and I think as it fits to his team this year, more so in particular. But I think it's one of the most underrated things we have in our sport, right? Everybody's focusing conversations on how many McDonald's All-Americans do you have, or what's your collective look like? You give me a guy who's been around the program consistently for 3-4 years, those are rare jewels in college. And you know what that does for a coach? All of a sudden now, I'm not the only voice that you hear. And I can't, harp upon this more, it's one thing for Seth Greenberg as a head coach to say something to the team, but when that team leaves that locker room and when they go out and they're hanging out, when there's a player that then reinforces what he says, but in a different tonality, that's a game changer. That doesn't exist as much anymore. So when you have somebody that's been around the program that long, that knows what's expected and what the standard is, and then can push you internally, and also with LJ being around, with the players that have been around here, they get it. Like that saves you a lot of trouble. And there's a lot of these schools out right now that are struggling with their culture. And Houston does not have a culture issue.
We have time for two more. Let's start in the back here.
Yeah, you commented on Pitino, his comment about not recruiting high school kids. What are your thoughts on coaches shifting from the mindset of coaching a team of students to coaching a team of professionals while still coaching at college state?
This is right in his wheelhouse.
I mean, I think it's there's a delicacy to that. I think you are coaching pros, but you're also coaching people who are in the developmental stage of their lives. And I think that you can have real, raw, honest, direct conversations with them, but you also need to pick them up, right? So this is not the pros, because in the pros, I can say, hey, you're not gonna play, and you're gonna sit the bench, and you can struggle and hate it, and we can just trade you. And the reality is, certain kids can be traded here too, right? The portal, you have optionality in what you wanna do. But I think for the coaches that I admire and the coach that if I ever were to coach, I would want to be is I want to be myself, which I'm passionate, I'm direct, I'm competitive, but also it's my job to make sure that you accomplish your goal. And I'm accountable for picking you up. That's part of my job too. So I think it's delicate, man, but the times are changing. I also think that coaches have to change with the times.
One more? Anyone?
Is there one Houston player you think could be a key to their championship?
As I have all the names of every Houston player here in my book. I think once again, what I talked about earlier, I'm not going to turn this into one player being a differentiator, right? We always single it out. Who's the one player that can be an X factor? Who's the one player that can make a difference? I think with the way Iowa State and the pace of the way they like to play, I think it's about the collective ability of Houston to disrupt that. And that's where I talk about, how do you have a counter punch? And I think Houston has a lot of counter punches in a variety of ways. And I think that's the biggest takeaway I will have from watching Houston play this year is that because of their new offensive ability that they have and shooting the ball from the three-point line, because they get so many offensive rebounds, because of how they rebound, you have to have a variety within your skill set to beat teams, right? It's just not one way. And I think when they're as multidimensional, I think it's about, how do they keep taking air out of the ball and how do they keep disrupting the way Iowa State wants to play? And that's how Houston wins games.
Just one more for you. Obviously, we talked about the success that Houston has had on the road, but obviously they've got down here at home as well. What type of environment are you expecting tomorrow in the top 10 matchup and obviously what Kelvin has been able to build here, right here in Houston?
I mean, this place better be live. I mean, look, I come into this making 3 half-court shots in a row, and it's gotten no reactions in all the places I've been. Like, what is going on? I will tell you, though, I think it was 5 years ago that we were here. 6? I'm dating myself. 6. And I do remember because I did my jersey thing here. It was one of the loudest places we had. So the fact that we haven't been back here since then, this is our 150th show. There's no better place I'd rather be than right here.